I'm Douglas Pancoast. I'm a professor of architecture here at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. I'm an associate professor, and currently I direct the graduate programs in architecture and interior architecture. I've been here for about 10 years. I came from New York City. In New York, I worked for architecture offices and large web design offices. My last gig working for somebody else was at Richard Meyer's office in New York City. And when I was there, I became really interested in software and using software to predict how people think and move and use space. So my work tends to kind of remain in that domain, try to find an intersection between sensing and actuation and responsive systems and architectural form, structure, and activity. And particularly right now I'm really interested in natural systems, the intersection of natural systems and social systems and architectural systems to make places for people to be in. That's what a building is to me. It's a collection of interacting systems. I always knew. I mean, I remember my earliest memories were of putting things together, you know, playing with assembly systems, either toy systems or things that I invented. You know, I think early on for me, I became interested in architecture as like a collection of activities and not just forms. So, you know, which I think kind of led me to, you know, a lot of the technology and the components I use now. But I can't really remember a time when this wasn't in the cards. Yeah. I think architecture is, you know, as an enterprise, as a human enterprise, is probably most emblematic of the idea of infrastructure. I mean, things happen through buildings, because of buildings. Buildings happen because of who we are and what we value and what we do and what we want to do on the planet. So I think a lot about infrastructure, how that works, and you know, how buildings and the larger systems that they operate in and the smaller systems that they allow to occur interact with one another. So that concept of infrastructure is something that really drives some of my thinking. I think that, you know, any viable built thing will have been conceptualized and made and delivered as something that can be responsible for its own sustenance, that has a purposefulness, that can you know, recede into some context when it's no longer useful. I mean, I think a lot of the things that have become kind of jingoistic and in the discourse of green architecture are just architecture. So we tend to, I think we embody that in the curriculum here in our school, where we don't have a class on green architecture. It's just principles that are embedded into all of the classes that students take to learn about architecture, both in terms of practice and building making and you know, the kind of architectural systems that one has to be responsible for. Yeah. So it definitely, how a building performs, what it needs, what it takes from a context and gives to a context it's all terribly fascinating. It was fascinating before we called it green. That's a good question. You know, for me, I like to think about the way in which appearance, behavior, and form interact with one another. So appearance being the way that a building not looks, not like appears, but appears over time, like how it emerges. Buildings are big and they're heavy and they're made of lots of different component parts, and they typically last a long time. So they don't kind of emerge overnight. So the temporality of the building, all the liminal stages of its development and appearance is very interesting. But then that can lead to and affect building behavior. So how people behave in buildings and how the building then responds to that behavior. And that all of that should be encoded into the form. So those three things interacting with one another, appearance, behavior, and form, are significant principles. The ongoing architectural project of just trying to find workable definitions for those concepts is something that is probably going to be with me. All students develop their own project, and they spend the rest of their life really trying to create instances of those ideas. And for me, those three are really important. Millennium Park is amazing. I'm a bicycle commuter, so I kind of occupy Chicago at a particular speed and at a particular scale that I find quite exhilarating. So there are thoroughfares and routes between buildings, through neighborhoods. Elston Street, from the Loop to Albany Park is a really interesting place to be. The Lakeshore Bike Trail really offers a lot of interesting experiences. There are places like the Lincoln Park Conservatory and the Chicago Botanical Garden and the Garfield Park Conservatory, which are really interesting to me. And places like that I find really fascinating, where we use an architectural container to create some sort of example of a kind of stabilized natural system that really needs that architecture to be persistent. And then I love my backyard. My backyard's really cool.
Why do you like your backyard?
I like it because it's when you have like a little place, plot of land in a city that you can kind of enact your kind of material investigations on, with kind of free from the editorial gaze. It's really cool. So we grow stuff back there. We embed it with instrumentation. We collect data. We do all sorts of interesting things in my practice that is really speculative. And then that becomes the way of testing ideas that are taken up further in other building projects. I love the Monadnock building. It's amazing. I like Rand's addition to the student center at IIT. That's pretty cool. I think that the University of Chicago campus has got a lot of really fantastic, new, kind of high-performing and very interesting structures. All of Oak Park is amazing. And I really like some of the small workers' cottages in Jefferson Park.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Chicago is because it burned to the ground and had to get remade, as we call ourselves, the second city, has a real affinity for urbanism and city planning. I think that of all of the larger American cities, this one is probably the most affected by master planning.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a lot of architects in this city that are really interested in urbanism, more than just one building, the relationships of buildings. And so when I think of like my favorite building, I tend to think of buildings in a place and how they begin to kind of define the really significant experiences in Chicago. Chicago's a rhythm neighborhood city. We love to name our neighborhoods, and every neighborhood has got a core and a constituency and an interesting collection of activities. But the few I mentioned, plus Andrew. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks a million.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not too long.
Yeah.